Good evening and Assalamu alaikum viewers. I'm Lutfur Ali. I'm going to be your host for this evening and presenter for Let's Talk on Channel S. We have a very, very important topic today to discuss. The topic is around Afghanistan and the unfolding situation of thousands of people seeking to flee the country. Are they correct to do so? What is happening in the country? Why did the United States and the Western allies leave the country so suddenly? What is the unfolding situation in terms of the brain drain that the Taliban are claiming that's taking place? Are these people really in fear of their lives as they're claiming? Now we have a panel of eminent experts who are going to try and help us discuss these issues and explore the matters further. If I can introduce you to our first speaker, which is Hasina Sayed, a human rights activist and entrepreneur who fled the country very, very recently. Good evening, Hasina. How are you?
Good evening. Fine, thank you.
Okay. Let me introduce also to you our second speaker, who is Peter Jovenel, a former journalist and was the only Western journalist who ever interviewed Osama bin Laden. Welcome, Peter. How are you this evening?
I'm very well, thank you. It's a
Thank
pleasure
you
to be here with you.
Thank you both for joining us this evening. Let me start with you, Saida. As a human rights activist and an entrepreneur who recently fled the country, are the risks that people are really claiming about the situation in Afghanistan? We've seen thousands of people seeking to flee the country. People are almost in a situation of crushing each other. And those are reports that actually people who aren't entitled to sort of leave the country are also seeking to do so. Is the risk absolutely real? You've been there, you've seen it all. Can you just take us through the steps that you went through to get out?
I was lucky enough that in my time it was the first days, so it was not so much crowded. Mine was a little bit, I could say it was chaos, but a little bit smoother than that. But as far as the other people concerned, of course, everybody is worried about the future because the future is very uncertain. Nobody doesn't know when the Taliban will implement whatever they say, what they will stand in their own word. So that's why has even not Afghan people, international community, everybody is very uncertain. They don't know what's going to be happen next. What will be the next chapter for Afghanistan?
Are there reports that we're hearing that the Taliban have started their brutalities, that they're seeking to torture people, and there's summary executions already taking place? Are these reports accurate?
I haven't seen those reports, and also we haven't nobody hasn't filmed those reports yet. But we have to see the positive side, and we have to hope for the best.
Okay. Now, is there a view that Western media is actually exaggerating what's happening on the streets of Afghanistan and what's happening in Kabul airport and other airports around the country? Is this an exaggeration taking place, or is the reality of what the Taliban are actually saying that they will, allow people to leave, that those that are non-Afghan nationals allow them to leave? Is that the case?
I don't think so. Media is exaggerating because everybody knows that what's going on around the airport is what chaos, and a lot of people are just has especially. I don't know how I can emphasize a little bit on that I don't know why Biden administration has announced that they will leave or they are not going to extend. So it makes more chaos on the people, and the people get more pressure. So I'm so scared today when I heard this news, and I was really concerned about all my Afghan fellows, that what will happen to them who can't reach to those gates. So it's not a good idea to announce to the people of Afghanistan.
Peter, let me turn to you now in terms of your perspective and take on this. Are these reports of people facing executions, people feeling a sense of threat, real? Are they genuinely concerned about their lives and their properties and the mass exodus that we're seeing on our screens? Is this legitimate? Is this something right that they should be doing?
Well, I would estimate that maybe 60% are economic migrants. They're not certain about the future, and they see this opportunity and they're taking advantage of it. Of course, the Hazaras, when the Taliban were in power last time, there was a brutal extermination of Hazaras and the Hazara Jat. So the Hazara minority is very nervous about the future, and they lack confidence in the new Taliban regime that's come to power. So the new Taliban regime has to prove itself. It has to prosecute and show people are being prosecuted for executing and killing people. And I think that's what we're looking for. So the Taliban needs to work a little bit hard.
We're also delighted to say that in addition to joining Hasina Syed and Peter Jovenel, we've got Professor Faiz Zaland of University of Kabul who's joining us. Welcome, Professor. How are you this evening?
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Salam to you and to the viewers and also to your guests. All is well, alhamdulillah. I'm in Kabul.
Thank you very much for joining us. Let me go back to you, Peter, because we left it sort of halfway in terms of discussing the reasons as to why people are leaving. Are they right to do so? Are they genuinely under threat? And also, I want you to talk a little bit about your experience of the Taliban, because you interviewed Osama bin Laden. You also interviewed the current leader, Baradar. And if you can sort of take us through your experience of them then and your views as to the things that they're saying now, that they'll be much more tolerant to women, that they will give rights to women's education and employment and so on. I want you to take us through what they were like and the atrocities that were committed by them, the violations and the misinterpretations of Islam that took place under their previous ruling and regime, and what they're like now.
Well, don't forget, there's more than one group of Taliban. There's more than one shura, and each shura reflects a slightly different culture because it's drawn up from a different part of the country. So the positive aspect at the moment is that the shura that's come from Qatar, they've obviously had a positive experience living in a sophisticated Islamic country, very advanced. Their children are going to school and getting educated there. And that's why I think the narrative from them is much more positive. And they are very keen that things should carry on as normal, that women should be educated, girls should be educated, they should have access to secondary education. And in fact, I was talking to a friend of mine just yesterday about northern province of Afghanistan. He runs a very large Western NGO that's involved in paying for the teachers and teaching a lot of children in the north. And he said all the schools are open. In fact, 2 weeks before the Taliban came, he received a call from the shadow education minister and telling him to keep the schools open. So that actually is happening. So there's been no stopping of schools in those areas. But don't forget, Afghanistan was a tribal society. So you can't look at it as one group and their remit goes over the whole country. You have to look at different provinces and then you'll see different results reflecting the background of the individuals that are in charge.
Peter, let me ask you one thing.
You must take that into account.
Peter, have you been in touch with the current leadership in any way whatsoever? And what are they saying to you? What are their views? Can you corroborate that they're actually going to give rights to women and they won't be carrying out the kind of summary executions that we've heard of in the past?
Well, I was in Kabul, lived there during the time of the Taliban. The Sharia law is actually very important. Don't forget, Afghanistan is a very lawless country. And there's a very tough people, so you actually have to have a very tough law that makes them frightened. And Sharia law does that. And in fact, since the Taliban have come to Kabul, crime has dropped dramatically. Before, there was a lot of rape, kidnapping, women getting stabbed just to take their handbags. You went to the police would do nothing about it. So that has actually all stopped for the time being. Of course, in the future, we have to see, but at the moment, things are much calmer. But also, we are getting a rather distorted perspective of Afghanistan because of the modern internet, which didn't exist before. So we do get videos from different provinces, and of course they are censored. And of course, some provinces, no one's filming anything, so we actually have no idea what's going on. But as regards to education in the north, at the moment, that's carrying on, and the word from the ARC, from the brother especially, is things should carry on as normal. And that's also why they want the US military to leave, because they want the airport to open for civilian traffic, and for life to go as quickly as possible back to normal. Mother brother, as I said, I met in Kandahar 4 days after he captured Kandahar. He's very much a man of peace. And I think if you have more people like him, you talk to him. In fact, when I first met him, he wanted to arrest me.
So let me ask you this, Peter.
The BBC, after just 5 minutes, he realized that...
Peter, let me ask you this. So all these reports that we're seeing on our television screens, we're seeing masses of people queuing up, almost in stampede-like situations outside of the airports. All these people, the fear is not genuine, that it's all exaggerated. I think earlier on you said that a lot of these are potentially economic migrants. So this is all exaggerated, and the media is portraying it completely different to us?
No, the media has to sell interesting story and dramatic pictures, and that's what you want, and that's what it's going to give you. It actually doesn't stand back and explain why people are wanting to leave. Now, for a long time, for 40 years I worked in Afghanistan, Afghans that wanted to leave, pay money to be smuggled to Europe. So some thought that this was a quick way out. I mean, these reports of people burning their passports is ridiculous, but of course no one's going to burn their passport. It's because they didn't have passports and they were trying to get on. Now, I'm not saying that a lot of them shouldn't be on these flights. Hazaras are concerned for their safety because in the past, they had a very hard time under the Taliban. Don't forget, the Taliban also blew up the Buddhas in that part of the country. So they're understandably very concerned about their future, and that's why they want to get out. But a lot of the younger chaps, they just see this as a great opportunity. They're not sure of the future. Don't forget, when the Taliban were in power before, the economy was virtually non-existent. But again, these young people don't remember that because they actually weren't around at the time. But mainly, people are concerned about the future, and there's massive challenges. You have potential famine, people not getting their salaries, teachers not getting their salaries, policemen not getting their salaries, and so that adds to the paranoia to an extent. And then on top of that, of course, you have the international community, the Americans giving visas for people to go. A friend of mine, Brett, who was in prison, even the prison wardens were getting him to fill out this SIV forms before he broke out of prison. So this became sort of very much a paranoia. I mean, you saw it. For anybody to jump on the plane and hold on to it, they must be completely mad. Everybody knows that.
Let me turn to Professor Zalan now. Peter, thanks very much for that. And I'll be coming back to you on some of the points that you raised. I want to turn to Professor Zaland. We know that the Taliban is now moving towards Panjshir, where there seems to be a pocket of resistance led by Masood. What's your view about the potential outcomes of that? Will the US and potentially the United Kingdom and its allies seek to support Masood in a possible civil war in Afghanistan? And what does that bode for the people of Afghanistani people?
They have had enough wars, civil wars, and invasions, occupations, all those things. As an Afghan, even Masood's son, he is not in the favor of any kind of military resistance. He is looking for some kind of political setup with Taliban. Already the Panjshir Ulama Shura, their tribal Shura, local Shura, they have been visiting Kabul and meeting with Taliban, upon the secondly, it's a very hard valley, a very hard terrain, a very mountainous valley, and it's already surrounded by Taliban from all sides. So if Masood or anybody else, they are going to do a military resistance and the roads are going to be blocked, there won't be any food, any fuel. The Masood and their friends might not be harmed in the short term, people will be much who lives there, who have been living there for 20 years in a cozy life. They have electricity, they had hospitals, they had clinics, they had a very good market, they had a very beautiful soccer field. So all those luxuries and necessities, if they are going to be cut off by Taliban for a longer time, I think the people will get against the Masood and the few others who are now drumming that they will do a military resistance. Secondly, for US and NATO, I think there isn't any legitimate cause for supporting any kind of civil or any military resistance against Taliban, because in the past 20 years, billions have been invested in munitions, ANDSF, Afghan forces, training, assistance, guidance, and structure organograms to be installed in Afghanistan. But all those are now in the hands of Taliban. All the weaponries, all the structures, all the infrastructure, even the drones and the Black Hawk helicopters, they're all now in the hands of Taliban. So destructing all those things and fighting against the weapons that have been given by US to the Afghan people and now confiscated by Taliban's government would not be very rational.
Professor Zailan, let me just stop you there for a minute. You say that the Taliban have taken control of all the munitions and assets and the helicopters and war machines and so on. Are the Taliban trained to sort of function those appliances, those machines of war?
Already been watching those social media clips from Kandahar and Herat, where the Taliban they are flying helicopters, cleaning those machine guns. They have been using those big artilleries they call DC artillery, which were given to NDSF in past years. They use those in Herat. They use that in Maidan Shahr fighting. They use that in Ghazni. Used those in a very accurate way, in a very good way. Secondly, I want to
bring in Sister Hasina here. I want to get a view from you as to how quickly the Taliban was able to take over Afghanistan again. I think it was about 3 or 4 days since the US announced their leaving. Why do you think the Taliban was able to take over Afghanistan so very, very quickly, given that 20 years the United States and its allies had spent building up a government of Afghans? What do you think were the main reasons behind Taliban takeover so quickly?
It is, I really want to tell this like in a loud voice. I want to tell the world that what happened really. And I think most of our foreign countries, they know, especially our United States, that why. The reason is that we had a lot of these corrupt political leaders who've been playing really wrong in Afghanistan. And I'm afraid to say that because of their corruption, it happened. Like why it happened, it was 130,000 these shadow soldiers were there, and our corrupt government was taking the money from the American government, pretending that they are training them, and there was it was not even 100. They were pretending there was 2,000 soldiers, 2,000 2,000 shadow soldiers were actually fighting. It was not. It was like 40 to 50,000 soldiers were fighting. So suddenly, when these chaos came up, so we had only 50,000 soldiers were there in the country, and most of them, they ran away. Most of them, they got corrupt, and they didn't have no ammunition, no food, no nothing. If you are in a battleground, if you don't have no ammunition because of our government corruption and no food, how you are going to fight, how you're going to resist? So I call these political leaders was like a rotten apple, and I call them like a woodworm. then suddenly they eat our country from inside, and once the pressure came out, they collapsed suddenly.
Let me bring Peter back into the discussion. So Saida is saying that the forces that were built up by the United States, the military that was built up over a 20-year period, the government infrastructure that was built up over a 20-year period, the collapse that happened overnight, almost overnight within 4 days, was as a consequence of the corrupt government that was established, that these people are on the take, and nothing was invested into the military, into infrastructure, into building up civil society organizations, and so on. So within a 20-year period, that would seem to legitimize the downfall so quickly. Would you agree with that?
Yes, Hasina's right. Although her figures are a little bit off, the actual strength of the Afghan army was 50,000. It's supposed to be 300,000. There was actually 250,000 ghost soldiers. Ghani and Karzai and other senior officials in the government were taking the money. And I don't know if you've seen the pictures of him fleeing the country. He's actually got so much money, it's bulging out of his pockets. And he's been taking the money out of the country for quite a long time to Dubai, and his wife. And I hope the international community, because don't forget it's American and foreign taxpayers' money he's stolen. I hope the international community brings him to account for his theft. But you're right, so I couldn't understand why Spinball wasn't recaptured if there was a force of 300,000. And then a friend of mine in the defense ministry told me they actually only had 50,000 soldiers. Even Biden was told that the strength of the Afghan army was 50,000 he couldn't take, and he decided to ignore that advice. And this is the end result. Don't forget the Taliban actually, gates of Kabul, they didn't fight. The Afghan army and police disappeared, which caused a vacuum, and they did actually the right thing. They actually went into Kabul to secure buildings. Otherwise, I've covered a lot of war. I was in Romania, other places, when, and also 92, when the Taliban left Kabul. When the authority leaves, it causes a vacuum, and that can lead to looting and damage. So the Taliban were drawn into that. And that's why, despite the fact they had orders to stay outside the city, they went in and took over the Ark and found lots of money that Ghani didn't have the time to steal, which is quite...
Just going back to our earlier conversation about your meetings with the Taliban, what about Al-Qaeda and ISIS? What about those two groups and their presence? And what's the relationship that they have with the Taliban? And can you just touch also on the meeting between the CIA chief and the Taliban this week? And what just take us through the thinking of what they might have talked about.
Well, if we go to first about the first question, the reason Al-Qaeda existed in Afghanistan is because the international community abandoned Afghanistan in '89 when the Soviets announced they were going to leave. So the aid and support that the international community had been giving the Mujahideen to fight against the Soviets, that was left. And as time went by, '92 again, I was in Kabul when the communist regime collapsed. That led to a civil war, and no one was interested in Afghanistan. The country was virtually bankrupt. And then bin Laden turned up with a small amount of money. It's only about $1.5 million, but he gave it to Mullah Omar. By that time, Mullah Omar had taken, so he gave him some money. And don't forget that bin Laden actually took part in the jihad against the Soviet Union. And so the Afghans had a lot of respect for him then. And as he was the only person giving them money, he was very much a guest in Afghanistan. So that's how Al-Qaeda managed to take root there, because of the international community ignoring Afghanistan. I hope they don't make the same mistake. And that's why it's so important that they engage with Mullah Omar, who's a man of peace in the Ark, in order to stop civil war. I'd actually like to touch a little bit on Panjshir, which we talked about, again, for everybody. And so we have to see and make sure that that applies to people in Panjshir. Taliban shouldn't go up there. They should leave the people in peace. And if people want to come down and engage with society, they will, if they see there's peace and stability brought by the Taliban. So this is a very important test. If the Taliban attack the Panjshir, then they're reverting to their old roots of being an aggressive force, which means that the war would continue.
So am I hearing you correctly, Peter, that the Taliban, if they give solace to Al-Qaeda, or the form of Al-Qaeda that hitherto we've known about that has carried out sort of atrocities and terrorist attacks, and the forms of ISIS, that Taliban, if they give housing to those people and accommodate those people in Afghanistan, that's okay, that's acceptable?
No, I don't believe this time they will. Because don't forget Bin Laden being, living in Afghanistan led to the invasion, which of course ousted the Taliban. But what I'm saying is the international community needs to engage with Mullah Brother and support his people. And that way, there's no chance the Taliban will come back. The Al-Qaeda will come back. And if they were, then the Afghan government, the new Afghan government would go, to arrest them or expel them from the country. But if the international community leaves, Afghanistan ignores it, then it's an ideal fertile ground for other groups, not only Daesh and Al-Qaeda, but there's other groups will actually come and take residence in Afghanistan. So we must support this new government.
Yeah. Let me bring Professor Zaland into this. Professor Zaland, what's your reading of potential of some of these extremist groups taking hold and partnering with the new Taliban that we've got? What's your take from the ground? What are you hearing? What are the developments? What are the local warlords doing in the local areas in terms of their alliance with some of these extremist groups?
Yeah, actually in 90s, it was a different scenario. In 90s, Taliban inherited Al-Qaeda and many other terrorist groups from the resistance of Mujahideen against Soviet, which was financed and supported by West, led by US. They give way and transportation, training to many Islamic extremists and jihadists to get into Afghanistan and to get into the Fatah to fight against the Soviets. After the Soviet invasion, when there was Mujahideen taking over, they kept those people with themselves. And many of the remnants from all those different jihadi groups, they remained while Taliban took over Kabul. So Taliban as an Afghan and as a Muslim resistance group, they could not say to the Mujahideens or to those resistant members of the international community, Islamic
Professor
international
Zalam,
community.
before you carry on, for the sake of our viewers, could you just explain the distinction between the Mujahideen and the Taliban? Are they one and the same? Are they different?
No, there is, if you put it to the rationality, the Mujahideens or the cause and the Taliban or the effect. When the Mujahideens got into a civil war between each other, there were 7 political parties or Mujahideen groups in Pakistan. 8 of them were the Shia Mujahideen groups from Iran. When they defeated the Soviets, the power game started. So they started fighting each other in Kabul. And once they fight each other in Kabul for almost 4 to 5 years, the country collapsed into a rogue state. There wasn't any economy or any social networking, any political networking. So people got pissed off, and people got a new resistance group by the name of Taliban. Taliban is traditionally a student of madrasa or a student of masjid or mosque who studies the religious books and religious theology and madrasas or religious schools. So these people, because Afghan as a traditional Islamic society, people highly respect their religious leaders, mullahs and imams of the masjid. They are considered as the main legitimate group or people for any aspect of living. If you want to get engaged, you must have a mullah to recite verses of Quran for your marriage. If you are having a kid, there must be a mullah who he recites azan in the ear of your kid, so he can become, and he can have a name, and he can become a Muslim by birth. If you die, there should be a mullah who should read verses of Quran and do janaza for your funeral and also the prayers. So the mullah is considered in all different sectors from birth to death as a legitimate factor in
so Professor
Afghan
Zalan,
traditional way of living.
let's turn to the potential structures that the Taliban might now establish in order to govern Afghanistan.
Yeah,
What are your
so-
views? I mean, just on the basis of the role of mullahs and the role of clerics. What kind of structure do you think that they'll establish? Will there be? I think we've already heard that there's no room for democracy within the sort of frame of governance that they're thinking about. What's your take on?
No, that's as a student of political science, democracy should not be only limited to the definitions of what the West is putting into that liberal, illiberal, or new liberal, all those things. Afghans were democratic society since thousands of years because we have Jirga. Jirga is a democratic structure where people have representatives, and these representatives decide on the senses of majority regarding any discussions. So what we'll have and what Taliban believes, it is not against democratic values, it is against the system that is democratization by West, which was a failure in past 20 years. We haven't had any good election. For example, what happened in 20 years, 14 years, we had a president by the name of Hamid Karzai, and then 7 years or up to 8 years, we had a president by the name of Ghani. None of them was representing a political party. When we say democratization, it must be a political party competition or election for the power. But there wasn't any institutionalization. What Taliban will believe, Taliban will have parliament,
let me bring,
upper house and lower house.
Thank you, Professor. Let me bring Sister Hasina. Do you agree with this perspective?
100%.
Explain why you agree. I mean, what we're saying here is that democracy, the Taliban have said they don't recognize democracy, or they'll not have the form of democracy that Western-style governments have tried to impose on them. What kind of democracy do you think the Taliban will put in place?
As I said that it depends on, we are going to see that what type of democracy they are going to implement in Afghanistan. But regarding the democracy, what the West has put in Afghanistan, we saw this is the result, what chaos we are seeing. Democracy doesn't mean you have to just take the money and run away. Democracy, it doesn't mean that out of nowhere there's the president of Afghanistan, Ashraf Ghani, out of nowhere you have President Ashraf Karzai. So democracy means like as my brother explained very well, that it's a low jargon. People has to choose their own legitimate leader.
Peter, let me turn to you. Why is it then that the Western media, the Western governments are portraying the Taliban in such a grim light? Why are we seeing repeatedly on our screens and the entire narrative? We've just had the G7 summit conducted by Boris Johnson, okay? And the outcome of that, I mean, some are arguing that actually it's just completely nonsensical. There's no real actions emerging out of that in terms of protecting and bringing back home the so-called people who want to leave. But what is it that, that's driving Western governments, Western media to portray the Taliban in such a manner? What's going on?
It's ignorance, simple as that. Now, just going back a little bit, wind back to democracy. The population of Afghanistan in 2019 was 38 million people. Ghani was elected to office, 900,000 voted for him out of a population of 38. So in my book, that is not democracy, although including their own readers by talking about the runoff between Dr. Abdullah and Ashraf Ghani. But in reality, out of the population of 38 million, only 900,000 people voted for Ashraf Ghani, which is mostly less than 1%. And if you had that sort of system in the West, that would be the end of Boris Johnson and everybody else. But for some reason, they completely ignored it and they talked about democracy. And on top of that, of course, Ghani won through corruption. There's so many reports of it, and it's incredible how the international community didn't point these things out. Not only that election, but of course the Karzai election as well. There was massive, the first election was not too bad, but the other ones afterwards were massive amounts of corruption. And that's why so few people took part in the final election, because they decided, the international community had decided who should be the leader of Afghanistan. And they brought people such as Ashraf Ghani, completely out of touch with society or reality. And consequently, you had a very unpopular president, and everybody knew about the stealing of the money, because of course soldiers and policemen weren't getting their salaries. Everybody knew the Americans were paying these bills. And then that's why a lot of soldiers decided, what are we fighting for? And they put down their guns and went home. It's all because of the West implementing a corrupt democratic process.
Peter, you say plain ignorance. But could there be other reasons? Could there be reasons to do with, British interests, US interests and so on? I mean, I read a report that about 20 years ago, rare earth minerals were identified and found in Afghanistan. Could that be one of the reasons in addition to others?
Well, this is one of the futures of Afghanistan, exploiting these deposits. Rare earth, you find a lot of it down in Helmand. Lithium is very common in Afghanistan. There's a lot of it, and so these things need to be exploited. But again, I think it was corruption. Ghani's brother managed to get a contract to exploit these things, all done completely illegally, wasn't out open tender, and consequently nothing happened. So this is part of the problem: the corruption that the West tolerated, ignored, and the collapse of the Afghan government is the result of it. And as I said earlier, I hope they prosecute these people. Karzai's brother included, another one who stole a lot from Afghanistan. Afghans know about it. This is not a big secret. And the fact that the supposed friends of Afghanistan ignored it and continued pumping money into this corrupt system. I've been going on for it, exercise. I've been going on about this for 20 years, but people don't want to listen. British government, American government, if you start talking about corruption, their eyes glaze over, and you're not invited again, basically.
Professor Zalan, let me turn to you. Peter's saying that the West is ignorant in its approach towards portraying Afghanistan in the way that they're doing. The Western media is ignorant. Do you agree with that, or do you think that the West has a far more sophisticated approach towards Afghanistan in the way that they're dealing with it, including the way that they're being portrayed?
I think I will just add to that. I agree with the ignorance part, but there is a new colonization also. Western is very expert in colonizing the third world countries, especially those that they have commodities, that they have minerals, they have fuel, they have fossil fuel, they have strategic and geostrategic locations. So the new colonization is the game that they play. Afghanistan, a country which is called the heart of Asia. So if US is not taking our lithium, if West is not taking our copper, they are actually using our land, our geographical location as a heart of Asia to govern the whole Asia. Afghanistan, for example, exists in a place where the One Belt, One Country project of China, or the CPAC project of China, Pakistan, that can be implemented or that can be prevented. There are Central Asian countries should be connected with Southeastern Asian countries like India and many others. So the Central Asian and Southeastern country of Asia can only be connected through a stabilized Afghanistan, and Afghanistan which is run by Afghans. So many of these heartland theories of governing the world, it gets to Afghanistan, it gets to geographical location and geostrategic importance of Afghanistan.
Let's come back to the conversation about looking forward in terms of Afghanistan. We discussed that there's been one of the world's largest mineral reserves of rare earth minerals. We know that there's been conversations between Pakistan, India, and certainly China in relation to exploiting those reserves. Let me turn to you, Sister. what do you think the future is in terms of people benefiting from, rich minerals of that nature and the facilities that Afghanistan has to offer? What's the potential? What does the future look like to you from someone who sort of fled the country?
I think we have to wait and see first to see how Taliban will react and what their implementation will be for things which they have said, their promises. And after that, we need international community help. We need them to work with this government if they would like to have some progress again country. And we need to also, as a previous business lady, I really want to emphasize in business, because a business can make money and money can make nation. So that's why it's very important, peace through business or business through peace. So that's very, very important.
Are you looking to go back at some point, and when will you be doing that?
Exactly. I'm just here because of my kids. I have children. I haven't seen them for months because I was in Afghanistan. So after some time, after everything is stable and everybody knows, and even international countries should know that what will be the future of Afghanistan. And as a mother of 3, I want to also to see that what will be my future, what will be all the women future in Afghanistan. And Afghanistan is our homeland. We can't leave them alone. This is because we are the pillar of Afghanistan.
So do you fear that the Taliban will impose their understanding of Islamic values on you in terms of wearing the full niqab, the full burqa, and limit you from your participation in business life, in economic life? Do you think the Taliban is going to do that?
That we are hoping, as they have announced. That's why I'm saying that they have to wait and see that will they implement their promises, will they fulfill their promises. So that's why I think regarding hijab, I always say that in hijab in Islam, I think all the women, they know that what in Islam is like. You can see the progress country Dubai, they are wearing the Islamic cover, nice hijab with the full cover. I think hijab is not an issue. Issue is the mentality, that how the mentality should work for the nation and how we can accept the woman who can work. But with hijab, I don't have no concern about what type of hijab, especially the hijab which is in Arab countries they are wearing. This is fine for in Islam because we are Islamic country, and I will love to wear those hijab. Is even it I make me so proud.
But what if young women who are growing up now are exposed to the internet world and the social media world and so on? What if they don't want to wear hijab? What if they want to go around walking in skirts or whatever in terms of their own value basis? Will the Taliban impose regimes of clothing on women?
As being a Muslim, I think even if our young generation would like to think that, or if they are a proper Muslim, they shouldn't argue about what they are wearing, what they are not. Their mentality, their education. We have to emphasize on education in regards of becoming a leader in Afghanistan to represent your country nicely. It's not about it. Our issue shouldn't be what we are wearing. Our issue should be that freedom of speech, humanitarian work. So those type of things we have to think about and we have to emphasize on those.
But do you think if you were to criticize the Taliban for something that they were doing, or another organization or other individuals were to criticize the Taliban for the way that they're governing, with the way that they're handling things, for their limits on speech, for their limits on people's freedoms, do you think that you'll be treated harshly, or others like you will be treated harshly by the Taliban, as they have done in the past?
I was very young that time, but I don't. If it depends on which, has Peter just mentioned before that it depends on which Taliban you are going to talk. Which Taliban is surrounding you, because as Peter just mentioned, and my brother also mentioned, Faiz, that there is a lot of type of group of Taliban you are interact. So I hope Mullah Zaif, which you can see his interviews, he said very nice thing about freedom of speech, about the women's rights and these things. So Mullah brother has mentioned also a lot of the positive thing. So we are just hoping. That's why I'm here. That's why everybody is moving.
Let me bring Peter in then. Peter, what do you think? Do you think the Taliban will actually allow freedom of speech, will actually allow criticism of their approach to handling things, that this new version of Taliban is one that's going to be all inclusive of different cultures, of different people, of different realities, and different interpretations of Islam for that matter?
Well, that's why we're waiting for this new, more diverse, more representative government. I'd like to remind you, 2 days ago, there was women demonstrating in the streets, which of course is freedom of speech. No one attacked them, no one harassed them. So that's a positive that's a positive sign, and that's coming from Mullah brother and his people from Doha. Of course, if they did the same thing in Nangarhar, it might be different, because the Taliban there are not so well. Someone flying flag, which they were rather hard on him and pulled it out. But don't forget, some of these Talibans are simple mountain folk. They're not very well educated, and that also includes in Islam. And so that's why it's important that people get educated.
I'm going to take a call now from one of our viewers. Who's the caller, please?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam.
To you and all to your respected guests. My name is Hussein. I'm calling from the Midlands.
Thank you very much for calling, Hussein. Please, what's your question, brother?
I'd like to ask the sister a question. Respectfully, she's come from Afghanistan. Sister, I want to ask you, obviously at the moment, we don't know what the Taliban are going to do and how they're going to govern. But from your experience, my kind sister, I wanted to ask you, as a brother, do you think the UK, the US and the EU have fulfilled their promises to the Afghani people and the brothers and sisters that have sacrificed their lives there?
I can say 50-50 for the development side, yes, but for the choosing our leaders, no.
Okay, can you expand on that so we can obviously get the information from yourself, if you can elaborate that on a bit more? Do you mean the leaders were like, obviously, you're saying that they were corrupt or they weren't?
The political leaders, everybody knows, since Karzai regime till now, the Afghan political leaders were all corrupt. That's why we are seeing right now this chaos in Afghanistan, and I'm hoping that they shouldn't allow them again back to the government to again run this government. It's scare me off, and when I see their faces again, I lose hope every minute. When I see their faces again, they look like no matter what happened in Afghanistan, those faces are cut and paste people, and Afghan people is very fed up from them, really fed up from them. We want new generation, we want new mentality for development of Afghanistan. There is a lot of educated people surrounding us, so they are capable of doing it. It just need a little bit push for them. It doesn't mean if you kill somebody you become a leader. So you are not becoming a leader by killing somebody. You become a leader by your thought, what you are thinking about the future of Afghanistan.
Brother Hussein, what do you think? What's your view on this? Do you think the US and its allies let Afghanistan down?
With you, kind brothers and sisters, anybody watching, that these corrupt leaders that the sister has obviously had experience on, they were representing the interests of the UK, the US, and the EU. They were obviously governing under their watch. They wouldn't have been able to govern the country without the economic, the political support. So, everything has been done under the watch of the UN, all the other organizations. That they know the history of the people of Afghanistan. They know the geography of Afghanistan. They know everything about. They've got experts on Afghanistan. So, for me, from here, I'd have to say that, the thing is, even the Taliban are admitting that even they don't understand how suddenly that they've got, the country under their governance. Even they thought there was going to be a struggle. So it seems, interesting what's going on, because, looking from over here and from the west and looking over the east.
So Brother Hussain, tell me one thing, and I'll bring the panel into this as well. What did the US and its allies gain from 20 plus years of trillions of dollars of spend and thousands of lives being lost on both sides of the Western allies as well as in Afghanistan? What did the US gain from all of this? Brother Hussain?
I thought you were going to ask the guest.
Oh no, I want to hear from you, because I think you've got some insights into this.
I was going to say, over 70,000 innocent civilian lives in Afghanistan were sacrificed. Also, the sons and daughters of the families who went out there to fight for this vision that the sister is obviously was sold. That the vision of a nation where it's going to be a nation that is going to be there for men, women, and children, give them education. And us here as well, we were also told that, that there was going to be a vision for this nation. And democracy is what actually, was the platform for it. But it seems now, democracy is in question and nobody has any answers.
Okay. Professor, tell me, what do you think the US gained from this? I mean, they've obviously invested so much, spent so much. They've spent 20 years and then they've suddenly sort of disappeared from the scene. What do you think they gained from this? What was their original intention of what they were trying to do? You need to turn your audio on, Professor. Professor Zalan, turn your audio on.
Yep, I did it. Sorry for that. Whenever we are listening and hearing the Western leaders, US leaders, they talk about the defeat of Al-Qaeda, killing of Osama. They believed and they announced very proudly that they won war in Afghanistan against the world terrorism. They say now that they were coming to Afghanistan after defeating of Al-Qaeda and other international terrorist groups. So they are happy that they have get rid of them, at least their leadership. But so that is very conceptual. But more or less what we follow, they were here for the nation building. They invested in the nation building, those billions of dollars. They invested in infrastructure and state building and democratization and all those rights, women rights and human rights, all those other values that they believe that they should be respected all over the globe. In all those regards, US was failed. It was a failure, and it was not a failure because Taliban's resistance. It was a failure because there wasn't a political will. It was a failure because there was incompetency installed in Afghanistan. It was a failure because Afghans were not having a freedom to choose their leaders. It was like an occupied nation, and it was a failure because incompetency came, and it was a failure that they brought people with themselves as an Afghan, which were many of them were dual citizens, and they now escaped. Everybody is now back in the West. Ghani and his whole cabinet, they are not in Afghanistan. They are abroad. They have been enjoying a very cozy life with the stolen money from the tax paid by the Western citizens. So the goal that they now say, especially the military leadership, they say they were after the Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups, and they defeated them.
Peter, let me bring in. You were nodding quite profusely at what Professor was saying. Now, you're in agreement with him that the whole idea and notion of nation building was doomed to fail from the beginning. Do you think now that that America realizes that this is their Vietnam in Asia?
Well, first, no one has succeeded in Afghanistan if you go for the military option. The British failed 3 times, the Soviets failed, and now, of course, once upon a time superpower America has failed. What Afghanistan has always wanted, and the Afghans are welcomed when they initially Americans came to Afghanistan, they thought they were going to be developing and rebuilding the country after a devastating civil war. Most of the money the Americans invested in Afghanistan was in military hardware, which of course supports the military industrial complex back in America. And that's why they spent so much money and there's such a little small result, except for huge, great military bases, which now, of course, they've abandoned. So the problem was their focus was supporting a military solution which never had a chance of working. But a lot of Americans and friends of mine actually have become millionaires out of this war because of this expenditure and this obsession with the war on terrorism. And that was the fault. If they put those resources into non-confrontational and development of Afghanistan through good small NGOs, because that's another problem. A lot of these companies that were working there were big American conglomerates that were every 3 months flying business class back to America for a 3-month holiday and then back again. This is why the expenditure was so huge and there's such a little result to show for it. So that's where they went wrong. They actually should have developed the country infrastructure, supported the private sector, which actually they worked against, and you would have had a very different result if they had done that.
We've heard also about British servicemen and women expressing their heartfelt, dissatisfaction in the way that the United States and certainly it's the UK has handled this situation. They feel let down too. What's your view on that? Are they right to feel in the way that they're doing? A great many lives were lost, great many people are injured. We're talking about British servicemen and women here now.
Well, my sympathy goes out to those servicemen that died and also their families were affected. But don't forget, and I used to be in the army. When you join the army, you join to serve your country. And the problem is with the British military in Afghanistan, it wasn't there for Afghanistan. It was there to support the Americans.
Peter, we're nearing the end of our program. I'd like to invite you all each around 30 seconds to sort of conclude. Please talk about what the future holds for Afghanistan, particularly in the perspective of should Western governments now begin to recognize a Taliban government and a Taliban regime. Sister Saeeda.
I think the future which I would like to see in Afghanistan is to have a peaceful country. Of course, as a human being, everybody would like to have their country to be peaceful, but inclusive government, to have interim government that everybody should be included, with no faces the same which we have been discussed about the future, the past politician like Karzai regime or Ghani regime. Nobody from those group shouldn't be in this interim government. Interim government should be neutral, so it should consist of the neutral people so they can decide openly and truthfully for their country, for the future of Afghanistan. Interim government should be for 2 years, and interim government should pave the way for the election, and that way they can bring all.
Thank you, sister. I'm going to turn to Peter now. Peter, if you can give us your 30 seconds on what you think the future holds for Afghanistan.
Well, the international community have to make sure the Taliban, especially the people from Doha, their commitments to stability, the rule of law, human rights, women's education, followed through to make sure that really happens, and then they should engage with them. So they have to observe what they do and make sure that the good narrative that's coming from Mullah Brother is implemented. And that way, when they show that they are capable of governing and there's law and order and people have no fear about walking in the streets and life goes back to normal, then the international community should engage with the government.
Thank you. And Professor, your take on this?
Yeah, international community led by US should not turn their back to Afghanistan. Afghanistan will get back to the 1990s. There will be a civil war. There will be drug trafficking, mafia, and there will be terrorist havens. If a really international community led by US believes in Afghanistan, which must be not a safe haven for terrorists and should not take back to 90s, it must recognize Taliban before even Taliban prove any of the values, any of the good governance.
Thank you, Professor Zalan. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to our viewers as well for joining us this evening. We've heard from our eminent panel members in terms of the situation in Afghanistan. I think the conclusion seems to be that there is an over-exaggeration by the West and the Western media as to the situation taking place. And certainly, viewers, you will form your own minds as to what's taking place. What's really important is that we look after each other, we pray for the people that are seeking to leave, and we hope that they have a safe passage wherever they're seeking to go to. Thank you very much to all our guests that have joined us and our callers, and hopefully you'll join us next time in our next program. Thank you very much and good evening.